Man, when I first opened Skull Horde, I thought it was just another one of those roguelikes. You walk around, kill a bunch of stuff, grab upgrades, repeat. Simple as that. But then there came a point where I just stopped progressing, and I was like, what is going on? That's when I realized this game has a lot more happening under the hood than it seems. So I went digging, testing, making a lot of mistakes, and I've put together the 10 tips that made the biggest difference for me. If you want to stop surviving by luck and start actually playing the game, stick around because it's worth it. I'm Matthew, and the video is about to start. If there's one thing I've learned playing Skull Horde, it's that the temptation to hoard as many units as possible is real. And it's almost always going to hurt you. It seems logical, right? More soldiers, stronger army, but the game thinks differently, and once you understand that, everything changes. The fusion system, the merge, is the heart of progression in Skull Horde. When you combine 3 identical units, they don't just add up their strength, they evolve into an elite version with amplified stats and completely new abilities. It's like you've created a different warrior from scratch, much more powerful than any common unit could ever be. This isn't just a cosmetic bonus, it's a real impactful shift in combat. So resist the urge to spread resources across dozens of mediocre units. A lean army with units evolved to the maximum fusion level will clear dungeons that a messy crowd simply can't. Think less about quantity and more about quality. Every slot in your party needs to be occupied by something that has gone through the merge process at least once. In practice, this means you should save duplicate units instead of discarding them as soon as they appear. When you see that third copy of a unit you already have, don't hesitate. Merge immediately. This management discipline is what separates those who get stuck mid-game from those who breeze through the hardest floors without much effort. A lot of people look at the items in the shop and just accept whatever shows up, especially when money is tight and the dungeon pressure is high. But let me tell you something. Accepting any item just because it appeared in front of you is exactly what will make your build crumble in the later floors. The game isn't about luck. It's about reading the situation. The most powerful items in Skull Horde almost always come with a built-in disadvantage, a downside. And that scares a lot of people the first time they see it. But the secret is that this downside can be completely irrelevant depending on your current build. An item that penalizes movement speed means nothing to a build focused on stationary turrets, for example. When you learn to see the item within the context of your synergy, the downsides stop being problems and become ignorable details. That's where the reroll comes in as a true strategic tool. Refreshing the shop isn't wasting gold, it's investing in the consistency of your build. Whenever possible, prioritize doing this when you have a discount available, because the cumulative cost of several rerolls can be high. The goal is to find items that reinforce the main tag you're building in that run, not to grab something generic just because it looks strong on paper. The player who masters this reroll system is the one who achieves cohesive, devastating builds instead of a collection of random items without synergy. Before accepting anything in the shop, ask yourself, does this item talk to what I already have? If the answer is no, spend that reroll without guilt. This mindset is what separates a mediocre run from a run you'll want to repeat. I'll be blunt with you. If you're standing still in some corner of Skull Horde waiting for your units to solve the problem, you're already dead. You just don't know it yet. The game puts you in control of a flying necromancer skull, and that mobility isn't an aesthetic detail. It's your primary survival tool, and ignoring it is the #1 mistake for anyone who starts getting stuck in the heavier waves. Your role here isn't to absorb damage. You aren't a tank, you don't have a shield, and you don't have an absurd health bar to sustain a siege. What you have is speed and field vision. Moving continuously through the rooms prevents infinite waves of enemies from cornering you. Every second you stay static is a second the game is punishing you, pushing more enemies your way while your room to maneuver disappears. But kiting in Skull Horde goes way beyond just running. Intelligent movement means positioning your character so that your unit's splash attacks hit as many enemies as possible without hitting your own troops with friendly fire. You can use your body as bait, lure groups of enemies into an area, and then dodge at the right moment, letting your army clear everything at once. That is something else entirely from just surviving. It's active battlefield control. When you internalize that moving is playing and stopping is dying, your skill ceiling in Skull Horde visibly rises. Start thinking of every room as a dance. You're always in motion, your enemies are always following you, and your units are doing the work while you orchestrate the chaos. Players who master this positioning can win with much simpler builds because they know that movement itself is a massive layer of defense. There's a moment in Skull Horde that completely changes how you view building your army, and it's when you realize that each unit doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's part of a larger set. Oaths are powerful bonuses activated by the specific composition of your troops, and players who ignore this system are literally leaving a massive layer of power on the table in every run. The classic mistake is building an army thinking only about the individual strength of each unit. This one deals a lot of damage, I'll take it. This other one has a lot of health, it's in 2. It sounds reasonable, but without thinking about the tags and combinations that activate oaths, you end up with a group that is technically competent but lacks real synergy. The difference between a common run and a dominant run is often in this layer of planning that most don't consider until they get beaten down on the final floors. The right strategy is to activate your oath as early as possible, preferably at the 3-star level, and use that as an anchor for all following decisions. Once the bonus is active, you can pivot units more freely, swapping weaker ones for evolved versions without losing the active combo. Oaths like Rat King and Blaze of Glory are perfect examples. When they are running in your army, the performance difference is absurd, almost unfair, and you'll feel it immediately on the battlefield. So next time you're in the shop looking at a new unit, the first question shouldn't be, is it strong, but rather, does it activate or maintain my oath? This shift in mentality turns army building into a much more satisfying strategic puzzle, and when all the pieces fit and the bonus triggers, you'll understand why this system is one of the smartest things Skull Horde has to offer. There's a very common mental trap in dungeon crawler games that Skull Horde exposes mercilessly: stubbornness with your initial build. You start the run with skeleton warriors, invest in the first few shops, and when you get to the mid-game, you realize things aren't flowing, enemies are tougher, the right items aren't appearing, and the army that seemed promising now feels stuck. Most players persist. The best players pivot. This mid-game pivot isn't admitting defeat. It's a reality check. If your initial warrior composition isn't delivering what it should after a few shops, the game is telling you something through the rare items that appeared along the way. A powerful item for archers or mages isn't an accident. It might be the sign that this run wants to go in another direction. Learning to listen to this silent language of the game is one of the most important skills you can develop in Skull Horde. In practice, the ideal timing to execute this pivot is between 2 and 3 shops after you notice the problem. Using rerolls strategically at this point to look for rat or petard units, for example, can transform a run that seemed lost into something completely viable. It's not magic, it's adaptation, and the fusion system the game offers makes this process smoother than it sounds, because evolved units of a new type reach the necessary power level faster than you'd think. This is so central to the philosophy of Skull Hordes that the entire community documents this behavior. The game's wiki dedicates considerable space specifically to this concept of the mid-game pivot. In other words, it's not an obscure pro tip, it's a real pillar of game design. The sooner you stop treating your initial build as an unshakable commitment and start treating it as a flexible starting point, the more runs you'll be able to consistently take to the end. Every player at some point runs past a shrine because they're too busy managing the chaos of the waves, and that's completely understandable. The problem is that these shrines provide some of the most powerful blessings the game offers, and ignoring them is like leaving money on the ground because you were in a hurry. Once you start paying attention to these points on the map, the difference in the quality of your runs is immediate and visible. Shrines can grant permanent or temporary bonuses, and the word that matters here is permanent. A permanent bonus, activated early in a run, grows along with the rest of your build, multiplying on top of every fusion and every item you add later. When you find a shrine that fits perfectly with the synergy you're building, the result can be something completely off the charts, the kind of combination that makes you look at the screen and wonder if the game is broken. Spoiler? It's not. You just played it right. But there is a dark side to this equation that needs mentioning: greed. When the timer starts rising, indicating the situation is getting more dangerous, many people insist on staying longer to try and farm a shrine or open one more chest. This is the moment where Skull Horde punishes uncontrolled ambition. Knowing when to take what's available and move is just as important as knowing how to identify a valuable bonus. The right mindset is to treat every shrine as a quick, informed decision, not as a mandatory stop or something to be ignored. You see a shrine, stop for 2 seconds, read the bonus, evaluate if it fits your current build, and decide. If it fits, great news. If not, move on without guilt. The game will offer others. What can't happen is you reaching the end of a difficult run without having used any of these blessings, because you are too focused on other things, because then you'll miss them at the worst possible time. If there is one element that summarizes the entire philosophy of the game in a single object, it's the hourglass. The timer isn't just a counter, it's constant pressure, a silent reminder that the game will never let you get comfortable. With every rotation, the hourglass completes, enemies get stronger, more numerous, and more resilient. And this escalation isn't gradual enough for you to ignore. It's a real spike, and those who don't respect this rhythm learn the hard way. The Flying Skull's mobility exists exactly because of this. The game gave you speed not just to survive combat, but to manage time efficiently. You need to be able to grab a chest, visit a shrine, and reposition before the next timer cycle turns a manageable wave into something that simply wipes your army off the map. Every second standing still without purpose is a second the difficulty is growing around you while you remain static. What kills most runs isn't a particularly difficult wave or a poorly constructed build, it's the combination of slow movement with an advanced timer. When you let the hourglass accumulate cycles without leaving the area, the enemies that arrive in subsequent waves have stats inflated enough to make even a solid build look weak. What was manageable 2 minutes ago is now an instant wipe, and the feeling is frustrating because it seems unfair, but in reality, it was a sequence of small, slow decisions that led there. The solution is simple to understand and hard to execute consistently. Always move with intention. Every movement should have a goal: grabbing that chest, activating that shrine, repositioning for the next room. Stopping to see what happens is inviting the timer to punish you. When you start playing with the clock in your head, anticipating the spike before it happens, and already being in the next area when it arrives, Skull Horde starts to feel like a completely different game, and much more under your control. There's a phase in every build crafting game where you look at what you've put together and think, this is incredible, it's got everything. And that is exactly where the run starts to fall apart. In Skull Horde, the temptation to grab any unit or item that looks strong individually is constant, but building with 5 different tags isn't versatility, it's dilution. You aren't creating a complete army, you're creating a group of strangers who barely communicate. The game rewards focus very clearly. When you decide at the start of the run that you're going to work with 2 specific tags, like rat and explosive or warrior and defensive, every subsequent decision becomes simpler and more powerful at the same time. You don't need to evaluate every item in the shop from scratch. You already know what you want, and everything that doesn't serve those 2 directions can be ignored or used as reroll fuel. This clarity of purpose is what separates cohesive builds from confusing ones. There is another direct benefit to this discipline that connects back to everything we've said about oaths. With fewer tags in your army, oaths become much easier to activate and maintain. When you're trying to serve 5 different tags at once, the chances of completing any oath consistently drop drastically. But when you have 2 well-defined tags as anchors, set bonuses appear earlier, stay more stable, and your build starts operating at a completely different level from the mid-game onward. So the next time you're in the early shops of a run, make that decision before buying anything. What are the 2 tags I'm going to prioritize today? It can be based on the first items that appeared, the first rare unit that dropped, or simply what you want to experiment with. The important thing is to commit to that choice and resist the shine of everything that doesn't fit. Clean, focused builds win runs that complete builds can't finish. If you've ever reached the late game with a promising build and simply ran out of gold to perform the merges you needed, you know exactly how frustrating it is to see your progression stall due to a lack of resources. It's a feeling of helplessness. The build is almost there, the right units are available, but your pockets are empty. The rat horde economy exists to solve this problem elegantly, and once you understand how it works, the late game changes completely. The core of the strategy is to build a wide board of bone rats with cheap merges early on. Rats are affordable units, meaning you can fill slots more frequently without draining your ducats in the early shops. But what transforms this composition from functional to broken are the right items on top of it. Specifically, Charon's Obol, Tongue, and Parting Gift. These items ensure that every death on the battlefield generates gold or grenades, turning enemy waves into a passive income machine that never stops. The logic is brilliant in its simplicity. The more enemies die, the more resources you accumulate, and the more resources you accumulate, the faster you can afford the expensive merges that the mid and late game demand. Instead of feeling that constant pressure of, I need to save for the next shop, you arrive at every shop with confidence, because you know the gold will keep coming in regardless of what happens. This gives you the freedom to re-roll without guilt and still keep the army evolving. What makes the Rat Horde economy so consistent is that it solves the biggest bottleneck of long runs without depending on rare drops or extraordinary luck. You are essentially building an economic foundation that supports any direction the run wants to take. It's one of the reasons this playstyle is considered meta for those who want to go deep, not because bone rats are the most powerful units in the game in isolation, but because the economic system they create fuels everything else to grow without limits. This is a tip that seems counterintuitive at first because we enter Skull Horde with the mentality of clearing everything, grabbing all possible loot, and turning every room into profit. However, after a few lost runs, it becomes very clear that not every fight is worth your time. When the timer is already high and your army hasn't quite clicked yet, insisting on a bad wave is basically gambling the entire run for a reward that might not even be worth it. I like to think that Skull Horde rewards reading the moment much more than blind courage. If the difficulty has already spiked, enemies are more resilient, and your group isn't melting waves safely, the best move is often to simply leave the area. It might feel like you're leaving resources behind, but in practice, you're preserving what truly matters, the run's momentum. And in this game, momentum is worth more than an extra chest or a stubborn fight. The most common mistake is thinking that retreating means weakness, when it's actually the opposite. A good player knows how to recognize when a wave has become too expensive for the current state of the build. If you force a bad fight, you lose health, you lose positioning, you lose time, and you still risk a wipeout of pure pride. On the other hand, when you cut your losses early and move on, you keep the run alive long enough to find a better shop, a strong shrine, or that upgrade that truly changes the game. So for me, the rule is simple. If the timer is pressing and your army doesn't inspire confidence, don't fight just because the fight appeared. Choose the battles that make sense. Skull Horde isn't about winning everything all the time, it's about staying alive until the moment your build finally gears up. And when that happens, you'll realize that walking away from some bad fights earlier was exactly what allowed you to get there.